CCNA interview questions for freshers: how to ace your CCNA interview. What is the difference between a hub and a switch? The main difference between a hub and a switch is how they are used. A hub is used for connecting multiple devices together, such as computers or printers, while a switch is used for individual devices. A hub has one input and many outputs, while a switch has many inputs and one output. What is the difference between a router and a firewall? The main difference between a router and a firewall is what kind of traffic they are used for. A router's primary function is routing packets, which means that it takes the IP address of the packet and moves it from one network to another. A firewall works by looking at the data being sent through it, like email or an HTTP request, and deciding whether or not to allow it through the firewall. This gives you more control over what goes in and out of your network. What is the difference between a Layer 2 switch and a Layer 3 switch? Layer 2 switches operate at the data link layer of the OSI model, where they only have knowledge of MAC addresses. Layer 3 switches operate at the network layer and know about IP addresses. Some Layer 3 switches can also act as a router, making them a hybrid switch. What is the difference between a public IP address and a private IP address? Public IP addresses are ones that can be accessed by anyone. This is the type of IP address you will get from your Internet Service Provider, ISP. Private IP addresses are ones that are not accessible by the public. You will need a private IP address if you plan on hosting a website, running a server, or accessing an intranet. What is the difference between IGRP and IGRP? IGRP and IGRP are both routing protocols, but they are designed for different purposes. IGRP is a distance vector protocol, which means that it calculates the best route to a destination based on how far away the network is from the router. In contrast, IGRP is a link state protocol that uses a complex algorithm called dual in order to calculate the best route. This complex calculation takes into account many factors such as bandwidth and load. What is the difference between OSPF and RIP? Both OSPF and RIP are routing protocols, but there are a few key differences. OSPF is a hybrid routing protocol that both broadcasts and communicates directly with its neighbors, whereas RIP is a distance vector protocol that relies on the hop count to determine the best route for data. What is the difference between a link local address and a global address? A link local address is an IPv6 unicast address that can only be used on a single link. A global address is an IPv6 unicast address that can be used anywhere. What is the difference between NAT and PAT? NAT is a one-to-one mapping between public IP addresses and private IP addresses. PAT is a one-to-many mapping where many private IP addresses can be mapped to one public IP address. The advantage of NAT is that it does not require as many public IP addresses as PAT, but the disadvantage of NAT is that all devices on the private network will use the same public IP address when using this type of configuration. What is the difference between a Class A IP address and a Class B IP address? A Class A IP address consists of the numbers 0 to 127. The first octet contains a number from 0 to 127 and the second octet contains either a number between 0 to 255 or nothing at all. A Class B IP address consists of the numbers 128 to 191. The first two octets contain a number from 128 to 191 and the third octet contains either a number between 0 to 255 or nothing at all. What is the difference between a subnet mask and a wildcard mask? A subnet mask is used by a router or switch to determine the network IDs and host IDs in an IP address. A wildcard mask determines which IPs are part of the